Okie Country 101.7, the Fun Country Morning Show, and Lauren Rich of Rich Consulting joining me today. She is a licensed therapist here in Muskogee and always some great advice. And today, very interesting topic. Today's topic cracks me up in a way.
I thought they were all interesting, but okay, we'll just go with today's.
Well, today, it really, so many people, well, if you deal with a divorce, it can be tough to deal with. Okay,
Yes.
and so sometimes a therapist, and I would say anytime you have a major life change, see a therapist, great idea.
Yes.
But can it be used against you? That's what you're here to talk about
That is
today.
the $24 million question.
Especially
Yes.
in these really brutal divorces where they're fighting for custody, they're fighting for assets,
That's
and
right.
it becomes a battlefield.
So this came about because I had a veteran who contacted me wanting to schedule an appointment, and he was one who had already deployed and come back and discharged, all those great things. And he was all about scheduling the appointment, and then he sent me a message that said, and I quote, "My buddy told me my ex would use it against me in court."
Right.
So
Cancel the appointment.
cancel the appointment. So I'm here to say, stop listening to your buddy. Your buddy probably isn't a therapist or an attorney. And while he has great intentions,
Right.
he may be doing you a disservice. So let's talk about that. You know, the
Sure.
fears of seeing a mental health provider because you don't want the diagnosis at all. Okay. So,
Well, you don't have to have a diagnosis to talk to a therapist.
So the insurance company says that I do, and
So really?
well, no, okay, so there's a workaround for that. So the insurance company, if you use insurance, says that I have to have a diagnosis, but there are vague and ambiguous diagnoses that I can use that aren't really going to have much of an implication. And to a certain extent, I use those for people who are just going through transitions, because it's not a fair diagnosis to say that somebody has major depression just because their dog died or just because they're getting a divorce. You know, it's an adjustment issue. It will not be forever. You know, it's situational, so to speak. And so A, there are those different diagnoses, but B, if you really don't want to have a diagnosis at all, pay cash, and your therapist won't even have to do that. There are programs, and I'm a part of one of those with the Department of Army, that we specialize in providing care for guys who repeatedly deploy.
Mm-hmm.
And because of its sensitivity, we don't even call it therapy, because it's really not. It's not therapy, it's coaching, and therefore coaching requires no diagnosis at all. Okay? And there are similar programs like that out there, you know, BetterHelp or whatever it's called, the online counseling app. They don't use a diagnosis at all. That's how they're able to get around insurance companies.
Right.
But his concern was my ex will use it against me. So I have never personally been in that situation. And boy, I hope I'm never in that situation. But I can see why the fear is there, because people are already scared and nervous about going to see somebody. And then when your buddy says, I think she's probably going to use that against you, that's an even bigger deterrent.
I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people that could be diagnosed with something.
Everybody.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Everybody has at least 3 or 4 in the big diagnostic book. Even
Right.
I do.
To me, it looks like if you went to a therapist, it would be a healthy response to
life.
an unnatural situation. I mean,
Yes.
it's really not natural that you build years and years and years of relationships in a lot of cases, and then you tear it apart. I mean, it's going to have ramifications in your life. And if you go to a therapist, to me, it only makes sense. You should probably get kudos for going.
And that is where I come from. So let me say this. One is that I hope that you vet your attorney as hard as you vet your therapist, because not every attorney is created equal, just like not every therapist is created equal. And if they're a good enough attorney, they should be able to argue that by you seeking help, you are becoming a better person. You're a better parent. You're more stable.
That's what I
you're
was gonna
at
think.
less risk. Would that not be a logical argument for an attorney to present?
Right. I mean,
I think so,
doesn't it
too.
make you a healthier parent? I mean, if you're getting
Yes.
at least that you're getting, it doesn't mean you're acting on the advice with
Yes.
the therapist, but if you do and you take that proactive step, I think it could be used as a positive.
Absolutely. And,
Depends on
and-
your attorney, though.
And that's my stance, and really that should be your attorney's stance as well. And so the other thing that you have to remember is that mental health records are highly, highly protected. Mental health and substance abuse, have even more protections than medical records. And so just because a therapist types a note, and let me say that there are two different types of notes. There are progress notes, which go to your insurance company or whoever is paying the bill, and then there are psychotherapy notes, and those are my personal notes. That is my property. And the only use for that is to differentiate things like, in the progress note, it would say client reported sexual abuse. In the psychotherapy note, it would say Cliff reports sexual abuse by Uncle Johnny from ages 3 to 10.
Right.
Okay, and that's my reminder. That's my personal information, which means I have the right to keep or destroy that information. It also means that it has extra special protections and can only be subpoenaed with a judge's order.
Right.
So those are really under lock and key. And I'll be honest, I am so vague in my charting, in my progress notes, that you could read it and you really wouldn't get anything out of it
But
if you didn't know
your
what was
code,
going on.
though, right?
But I know code. That's exactly right.
That's
And
good.
and I can log that information and I can keep that so where not everything is in written form. So to that I would say I understand the reservation, I get the concern, but ultimately, are you making things worse by not seeing a provider just because you don't want it to end up in divorce court?
Right.
And you have to really weigh what's the cost of not going to see a therapist.
So, can it actually be used against you?
Again, in my opinion, no, because you can't just say he's not a fit parent because he has a mental health diagnosis. That's not our qualification or criteria for parenting or divorce. And the state cannot take children from you because you have a mental health diagnosis. That's against your rights as a parent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. I
Yes.
couldn't even imagine that a divorce court would even want those records.
And they're not
unless
gonna,
there's police records and stuff, and then I think it takes it to a new level. Then.
Unless there's some type of threat to the children, I wouldn't ever see why that would be dragged in there. And I've had veterans recently who they filed for divorce, and then the ex has claimed that they are not a fit parent because of the mental health diagnosis, and it was refuted with a letter by their attorney, and it was a done deal.
Right.
You know, it has not come back up again.
So this though can keep people this
This
belief,
myth,
this
this
myth, can
misconception.
keep people from getting the help they need when they're dealing with one of the hardest things they've ever been through.
Absolutely. And studies have shown that fathers who are away from their children suffer higher rates of depression. But again, it's not depression in the formal clinical sense. It's in a transitional adjustment phase of where I'm not getting to see my children every day like I once was.
Right.
You know.
And I've been through the divorce thing. I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
There have been times when I didn't even know where my kids were,
Yeah. And
what state they were in,
and that is
stuff like that.
That is the line between worry and fear. So
Just
absolutely. And
It's tough to deal with.
knowing that you can go talk to somebody about that and that they're an impartial or an objective third party and they're not going to pass judgment on that is really what's the most valuable in those scenarios. And you don't have to go for forever. Just go for the first 6 months when you're getting divorced, whatever it may be, and work through it, process that information, and then move on with life. But ultimately, you have to think about what are we making worse by not seeking help? Do I risk losing my children because I've not sought help?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Makes
also
sense.
a really big deal.
So how does someone reach you?
Oh, the usual face, Google.
All of it. Lauren
All of
Rich,
it.
Rich Consulting. You have a YouTube channel. You can also
Sure
get a
do.
replay of today's broadcast there.
You sure can.
And schedule an appointment with you, licensed therapist. And
918-912-2266.
And contrary to popular belief, it cannot be used against you.
Yes,
So don't
correct.
be confused.
In fact, if you have an attorney who sees that diagnosis or they say, oh my gosh, I don't know what we're going to do, you might want to consider getting a different attorney.
Right.
Because that means that they're not very competent in what they're doing. Because like I said, if you have a good attorney, there should be absolutely no reason why this is an issue at all.
And because you need a little help in life doesn't mean you're crazy.
That's exactly right.
You're not crazy.
And-
We're people trying to get through tough things.
Yes, no,
That's it.
and I will say, you know, I practice what I preach. I have colleagues that we go see therapists too. You know, my dad died, I went and I saw a therapist. You know, my college roommate, who's also a therapist, she was diagnosed with lymphoma when we were 27.
Right.
And she went to see a therapist. So there's a lot of us out there that practice what we preach, and we go see people too.
That's it. And just a phone call away. Number
right.
one more time.
That's right, 918-912-2266.